Hi, everyone. I am Robin Hedelman-Weinberg, VP of Financial Resource Development. I am delighted to welcome you to the launch of the Root Society, recognizing those who have given the Federation 20 years or more. We are 8,000 strong. Collectively, we donated more than $10 million in 2020 and $650 million over our lifetime of giving. Before we get started, quick housekeeping. Closed caption is available. You can view them by clicking Show Subtitles at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A format, and this program is being recorded and it will be shared with you afterwards. In June 1992, I received a letter from UJA Federation of Greater Washington, thanking Matthew and me for, quote, making a statement this year. How do I know this? Because during quarantine, after watching every single movie on Netflix, I started cleaning my house and found this letter buried deep in a drawer. It went on to say, quote, you take this mitzvah of tzedakah and tikkun olam seriously. What I didn't know then that I know today is how much my gift has been enriched by being a part of and contributing to Federation. I hope you all feel the same, because that is why we are here today, to celebrate you, your commitment, your generosity, your vision. It is a testament to who you are and what you hope and dream for the future. When did you realize that your gift was more than a donation, but an investment? You helped seed experimental ideas. You offered guidance as projects were brought to fruition. You understood impact. It doesn't happen in a week. You became a stakeholder in this community. And somewhere in those 20 years, you saw yourself in the narrative of the Jewish people. It is in our story of creation. We are told it is not good for man to be alone. Our best selves happen when we come together. We have choices in how we spend our time and where we want to have an impact and where we want to grow and find meaning. I am happy we are working together in common purpose with Federation. We heard so many stories from you about why you give year after year. My parents taught me well. No gift can reach as deep and as far, because nothing felt better. We are responsible for one another. You are suffering. It might happen to me. To make a difference, to bring about justice. It's urgent. It's about tomorrow. You also said you believe in something and belong to something, that our gift is about transmitting values and rediscovering who you are and the place you have in our collective memory of our Jewish people. Last month, Federation honored Bob Kogat, local business executive and philanthropist, with the inaugural Community Builder Award at Federation's Cornerstone event. Bob spoke with Josh Bernstein, reflecting on his philanthropy and his relationship to Federation. Take a look.
Yes, I've always had an understanding or interest in community and being part of it. So that when my partner and I were building houses, and I was 25 years old, is when we made our first contribution to Federation. Wow. We contributed $300 to Federation and at that time, and that was the beginning, and have done every year since. And fortunately, the numbers have grown also.
Yes, they have.
It's a question of, if you have a certain amount of disposable income, how much you choose to invest back in community. And then it's a matter of, okay, what choices do you make? And so what we've then done is we said, look, we're members of different communities. We're members of the Washington community, members of the American community, members of the Jewish community. And with the rebirth of the State of Israel at this time, it became particularly significant, so that we should be, when given the opportunity, participate in the different communities. So what we've tried to do is balance and say, okay, you give to all of these different ones, and just a matter of determining the priorities, but try to be represented and recognition that you've been fortunate and that you want to share in that good fortune. So we've been lucky.
I think of it as an impressionist painting. There are a lot of dots, and when you take a step back, it makes you can't focus on one of the dots of the painting. You have to take a step back and see it in its totality to appreciate the beauty of what you and Arlene have done.
That's
together.
a very good way of looking at it. It's true.
I love what Bob talks about, the importance of investing in Federation, and shares his belief that a gift to Federation is something larger than us. He is filled with hope. Author Leonard Fine wrote that Jews are prisoners of hope. I hope that what he meant is that Judaism has taught us that it is within our power to change not only the world, but ourselves. As Bob notes, we do that in partnership with Federation. In the 20 years since you first started giving to Federation, so much has changed, as it should. Back then, we never discussed impact or investment or social change. Today, a perfect example of how Federation has evolved is Sherry Merrill, who in a moment will facilitate a conversation with 3 community leaders, each reimagining the possibilities for the next generation. Sherry's position, wait for it, Chief Impact Officer. That title is indicative of what Federation has become, focusing its efforts where the impact is transformative. Welcome Sherry, Adaret, Rachel, and Daniel to hear more about that impact.
Thank you so much, Robin. You know, it's truly an honor and a pleasure to be the first at our Federation in this role, but I'm in good company now across the Federation network as Chief Impact Officers, Chief Impact and Growth Officers are popping up across the entire network. But in our community, we know that impact didn't start today or 3 years ago. It actually started many, many years ago as we started to invest for the future. We know that recognizing the long-term efforts of the work to put these programs and these initiatives in place didn't start yesterday. It started well before then. And so it's a great honor and pleasure to introduce our panelists today, our 3 speakers, starting with Rabbi Adaret Drucker. So Rabbi Adaret Drucker is the Executive Director of the Den Collective, which I am sure many of you have heard about. It builds intentional Jewish community with folks from their early 20s all the way through to their 40s across Maryland, Northern Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And the Den seeks to build spaces of meaning that invite people to deepen their connection to Judaism through a lot of different attributes: personal connection, pastoral care, and really just their ongoing dialogue with each other. And so Rabbi Adaret is leading the effort at the Den to integrate her vast pastoral experience, her congregational experience, her hospital chaplain work, and really bring to life her work as the relational-based community organizer. So thank you for joining us. And we also have Rabbi Daniel Novick. So Rabbi Daniel serves as the Executive Director of George Mason Hillel, but only since July. I think before then, he spent 3 years as the Assistant Director of GW Hillel, where he managed and oversaw, I'm sure, programs that many of you have heard of, from the Nuance Project to the DMV Hillel Pipeline Project, and obviously, of course, the GW Hillel Summer Internship Program. And as a native of Northern Virginia who is passionate about relational-based engagement, Rabbi Daniel understands the opportunities and the potential for Mason Hillel to reach its diverse demographic of students. So welcome and thank you. And finally, we have Rachel Gildner, who serves as the CEO of Gather DC, the premier relational platform for folks in their 20s and their 30s in the DC area. Rachel guides the organization to build community and to help its constituents create sustained adult Jewish identities. Before launching Gather DC, she pioneered Hillel International's peer engagement and education initiatives, which reached thousands of unengaged young adults on college campuses. Rachel has a BA in sociology from Columbia, an MA in higher education from GW, and there's obviously a theme here of GW, Hillel, and lots of familiar faces. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. You know, when we all saw that data coming out of our community study, I think we were inspired, in some sense not surprised, but energized by the opportunity and the momentum in front of us to connect what you all have been mobilizing and bring to our community and associate it with some real clear outcomes around behavioral change, new norms that we wanted to see, and thinking through how we continue to evolve and grow our community to, not just impact the work that we were already doing, but prepare and get ahead of the future, knowing that what we seeded in the moment was really paying dividends for the future. And so with that in mind, I'll just really quickly share that over the last 3 years, over $3 million has been put toward innovation impact, seeding funding for organizations that maybe saw an opportunity but didn't know where to start or needed to be able to enhance the risk profile a little bit to move the dial in some of these critical areas. And recognizing these long-term efforts are what enabled and sustained this effort to really branch out into this innovation and impact space. So all three of you have come along on that journey, and it's in no small amount to the donors who are on the call today and folks who have invested in the opportunity to create this space and this work, especially as it pertains to the vibrant Jewish life that we want to sustain in Greater Washington. And so that's my first question as we start to enter into a dialogue about that is, what motivates you actually to drive change in this space and to focus on the work that you do? I think, Rachel, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And I just want to echo again how grateful I am to be here, and the fact that both I and Gather are here in this moment because of all of the people on this call. So again, immense gratitude. So for me and the work that I do and that Gather does, it is truly about the young adults that we seek to serve. It's about their stories. It's about their past Jewish experiences, both positive and negative. In my own personal Jewish journey, I know what it is like to be both inside the Jewish institutional world and also on the outside. And so understanding all the reasons why young adults don't participate in Jewish life is really important to how Gather does our work. So as a relational platform that tries to engage young adults, thousands of young adults across the city in Jewish life that's meaningful for them, what drives me is really knowing who they are, meeting them where they are outside of Jewish spaces in particular, and understanding what they're looking for, what's going to help them live a meaningful and connected Jewish life. And then finding the multiple ways to help guide them along that path. And so Gather has had the chance to do that here in the DC area for over 7 years now. We've done it to scale, reaching thousands of young adults. And because of the local investment in this model, we are now able to serve as a model to other communities around the country. So it's really, it is the young adults. It is the belief in doing things differently, hearing hard things, saying hard things, and being in ongoing relationship with young adults. So thank you.
Rabbi Daniel, I think that's resonant with some of the things that motivated you in terms of the work that you did, not just at GW, but part of the rationale and the logic for moving into the Mason Hillel role.
Yeah, totally. First of all, the things that Rachel was saying, feeling seen, feeling understood, hearing the stories were things personally that I felt both from Rachel and Rabbi Adair when I moved to this area 3.5 years ago when I met with them and talked with them. So obviously it was colleagues talking, but the same methodologies that we have explained in terms of, or will explain in terms of our work with our communities. I certainly felt it from my 2 role models who are on this call, 3 role models, Sherry included. So it's really special for me to be here. What motivates me in this space is just hearing the stories of countless college students who I interact with daily. Those are stories that I'm hearing of the desire to feel seen and feel heard, the desire to be connected with one another and be connected with our rich tradition. And that is actually what motivates me to continue this work. It's what's motivated me to enter the Hillel space after rabbinical school when I went to GW. It's what motivated me to switch from one George to another George and work at Mason Hillel now as the executive director, where we're actually tasked with finding the countless hundreds of Jewish students in the Northern Virginia area that have not been served by Hillel or the Jewish community so far. And so that is what's motivating me. And what's motivating me is seeing myself in that storyline as well, as someone who grew up in this area and was kind of invested by the many people on this call and the community through my many Jewish journeys growing up. And in Hillel, I saw it work for me. And it's not really me paying it back, it's me paying it forward to help invest in this generation in a way that's resonant for them. And so that's what is motivating me. It is a Jewish motivation. It is rich in our tradition and history of constantly changing and evolving. And that's the work that we're trying to do at Mason Hillel to then support them in entering the next young adult stages and communities that are represented on this call.
Rabbi Daniel, one thing that really resonated with me that you just said is your Jewish journeys. You're one individual, and yet there was many pathways for you. And I think Rabbi Aderet, that speaks to the Den. And I'm going to make a logical leap, but I think that's what maybe motivates you in this space.
There I am. I have to just say how grateful I am to be here, because of the importance of the Federation, how they support us and the Den, but really to be able to have this space with my colleagues who I respect. So often we're like nose down in the job, and to be able to step back and see the impact we're having as partners individually, it's a really, this is a blessing. This is what I think continues to fill us up. So thank you for creating this space. I love the question of motivation because I think so often there are a lot of shiny objects that can derail us, and to come back to the core of what is the reason I'm doing this work is really important. Whether I was on the pulpit, on campus, now in this entrepreneurial space with 20s to early 40s, my core motivation remains the same. And I tell people, like, we're talking about human beings. So whether they're gathering in a building, on campus, or at a cafe, we're talking about core human elements. And what I pull from is this vision of the fact that our Jewish tradition contains a treasure trove of wisdom and values that we all know can inspire this life of purpose and meaning, that can comfort us in difficult times, as we all have hopefully utilized over the last 2 years, guidance when we have questions, ways to sanctify our life's transitions, and so much more. And I have this very clear vision of each of us moving through life on a conveyor belt, if you will, like at the airport. And when I think about it, we're moving through life, and there's this duffel bag of the Jewish wisdom, of the teachings and traditions, and the idea that there are people moving through life, their life is still beautiful and rich, but that they don't even know that this treasure trove of wisdom and resources is available to them. Or even worse, they see it and they say, I can't access that. To me, that's the motivation. I want every single person in the Jewish community to understand what is available to them. So it very much is indicative of the way that we steep everything we do in seeing, making sure everyone feels seen, heard, learning their story, but also making sure we're bringing like a deep and authentic Torah, so they're understanding, oh, this is mine too. So I think about that motivation and what we do, that we're addressing people in this population who haven't yet found like their Jewish spiritual home, their community, or a rabbi. And the idea of why this is numerous, but we know that a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to get to the heart of the matter. And so that's why we begin with each person's story and we continue in dialogue with them. So I'm really grateful for the Federation for being a convener for us to be able to do this work. It's huge. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Aderet. And I actually think, this is a good tee up maybe for Rabbi Daniel and for Rachel, because a little bit of that next question that I think you just started to drill down into is, so how do you actually stay ahead of the curve then, right? This motivator is what I think inspired the investment in that innovation, knowing that it would lead to this impact. That Federation, thank you for highlighting it, was an early adopter or investor in a lot of the work that all three of you are doing, from the pipeline project to Gather and to the Den. And we know that being able to expand on those ideas, on those models is really the power of that investment and that impact. And that, like we said earlier, it doesn't happen overnight. It requires that long-term commitment of our community to really invest in sustaining that vibrant Jewish life. And so Rabbi Adaret, I think you already spoke to this, so I'll defer to Rabbi Daniel and to Rachel. What do you plan to do to stay relevant or ahead of the curve? I'm sure that's top of mind for you.
Yeah, when we think about staying ahead of the curve, context is super important here. And that actually gives us the blueprints for finding where there are gaps in our system, in our community, and how to try to fill them. So the context, I'll explain 2 examples. One was the pipeline project, which was mentioned, and how that kind of fit into what I just mentioned, which was there was a gap in the handoff from our students at Hillel to the amazing work that Rabbi Adaret and Rachel and many others and organizations and communities are doing in this area. We can certainly send lists, we can certainly pass off names, but we felt that there needed to be a concrete system in place to establish that pipeline. So the context of the gap is what we tried to find answers to. So we brought together many different Hillels within this community, and we asked that question. We brought in Gather DC, we brought in the Den Collective to ask that question, and we are working through the investment of those grants and the Federation to figure out what that pipeline looks like. That is one way that we are trying to stay ahead of the curve. That started at GW, and GW is certainly part of it, and what is it, I guess, symbolic of such a collaborative nature of our community is that when I made the shift to Mason Hillel, those Hillels were like, Mason Hillel, you, Daniel, need to be part of this world too. And it was a no-brainer to involve us in that work as well. So I'm grateful for that collaborative spirit. But here's another gap that I want to share as kind of an example of pipeline and of how we're trying to stay ahead of the curve. When I came to Mason Hillel in July, I had a meeting with the provost, Mark Ginsburg, and he shared with me that 60% of Mason students come to us through the community college system. That is a huge number. And that is, again, a context, a gap. And Mason Hillel, and many Hillels for that matter, have not yet built communities and built structures to support those systems. So the question I'm trying to answer there is about that initial pipeline. We talked about the pipeline college to post-college, but how do we shift the focus to also talk about the students who are young adults, who are college-age students, but not on a traditional 4-year pipeline cycle of college life on campus. And so those are students living throughout all of Northern Virginia. Those are students who are affiliated with Mason because many of them have a Mason ID, have connections and college credits and transcripts that show Mason classes on it, even though they are not a, quote, full-time student during a 4-year experience like many college students are in a typical normal environment. And so those are the gaps. That's what we're trying to figure out. And it's investments like the Impact and Innovation grants that supported the pipeline from college to post-college life that really help us dig into that work. And that investment kind of in our current structures and supporting our day-to-day operations and day-to-day work really give us the space and the resources to figure out the gaps in our communities and how to address them. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
That's really helpful, Rabbi Daniel. And it's insightful that there's an entire demographic, even within that college system, who needs to enter into a Jewish journey. And that is potentially an area where if we can get ahead of that curve, we can continue to move the dial on the number of folks engaged and actively participating in Jewish life. And Rachel, I'm sure that's top of mind for you. You mentioned earlier, shifting from a local organization to a national entity and how that actually looks. And so would love to give you a moment if you want to weigh in. And then something that's percolating while we're talking about this is kind of that other data point that I mentioned earlier. 41% of our Jewish population is in Northern Virginia. And so I'm really curious, after Rachel, kind of you weigh in, to think through as a group, well, what does this look like for Northern Virginia? And, Rabbi Adaret and Rabbi Daniel being really active in that space, curious to hear from you how you're navigating that demographic in that region. So Rachel, kick it to you to respond in the same way, and then maybe over to you, Rabbi Adaret, to help us understand how it overlays with Northern Virginia.
Yeah, thank you. so much agree with what my colleague said so beautifully. And specifically, Rabbi Daniel, to your points, I think the way that Gather thinks about relevance and staying ahead of the curve is we think really deeply about what it means to listen. What it means to listen to data, right? Like relational work is very data driven. A huge part of the investment from Federation, I know for us and my colleagues on the call as well, have gone to relational data. How are we capturing what we're learning about the young adults and the people that we serve? So again, I love this data point, Rabbi Daniel, right? Like with this data collected, you now know that there's a gap. And I think one of the ways that Gather really stays kind of ahead of the curve is our proximity to the change as it's happening. So there's a concept about kind of on like snow melts from the outside, right? Like change happens on the outside first before it comes into the center. And so for Gather, we really see ourselves as kind of a bridge. We live with a foot on the outside and a foot on the inside. And so for us, as we meet people for coffee, as we listen, again, like at scale to hundreds of people, we read data that comes to us, but we're also listening really deeply. And so all the listening that we're doing on the ground builds up, and we start connecting dots to say, oh, well, so many people have just moved here and during a pandemic, and they need a very specific type of intervention. And so that listening keeps us really responsive in live time. And I think for us, that's how we see our relevance moving forward. So. And I'll turn over to Rabbi Adaret for the wonderful Nova question.
They're all great questions. So I think there's so much that's just been said. I think what I want to focus on is this idea of we haven't really changed our method in Nova. What we've done is we've just like zoomed in more so because we're using the same methodology, right? We know that people are seeking like thick, rich, intimate communities where they're known to each other. They don't want to just like show up to a program and then leave. I mean, sometimes there's a need for that, but they really want to, we've heard the word village so often with our community members, and that's come up a lot in the listenings campaigns that we've done with our Nova folks. What do you need? And they said, I just want to feel the Jewish community around me. I want to feel like I'm part of something bigger. And we'll say to them what the studies show, that there's so many people, but they said, but where are they? And we know that they're there. And so really very much like what Rachel said, this idea of listening, of like going out to the people, we're continuing to learn so much from them, and we're partnering with them. We are co-creating classes, gatherings, opportunities. We are doing leadership development so that they have the empowerment to go out and reach other people, so that we can really continue to build this network that finds one another so they can, live Jewishly and learn together and really start to feel that Jewish community that we all know is on the horizon, but for them to really feel like it's around them.
Can I come in?
I was absolutely going to kick it over to you. I was going to say, this question is close to my heart. I live in Arlington, so I love hearing these answers and kind of thinking about the context in which it relates. So absolutely, over to you, Rabbi Daniel.
I love the language of co-creation. I love the language of community building in Northern Virginia because it's near and dear to my heart. As Sherry mentioned, I grew up in Northern Virginia. I grew up in Herndon. I grew up at a time when, my high school was right on 66, and I would go 3-4 days a week and drive up to Rockville for my USY meetings, for my youth group meetings. I grew up in a community that was strong and small and mighty, and that was building community in Northern Virginia well before this report came out. And so part of my blood, part of my desires and work here is essentially as a Jewish cheerleader of Nova, for example. I feel like there's so much richness and depth to that region, and it's very different from DC. It's very different from Southern Maryland. Every community is different no matter what. So it just feels so professionally and personally meaningful for me to return to this area and work in Northern Virginia, where, by the way, 70% of my students remain. 70% of Mason graduates remain in the Northern Virginia area. So if we're talking again about pipeline, for me, it's not just how do I create and co-create with my students experiences that give them ownership of their Jewish identities, but how do I create and co-create and facilitate ways for them to become Jewish contributors to this growing, beautiful region that has so much Jewish stuff going on with them and for them. So that, I just feel like there's so much to explore, so much to do. And one thing we are finding with our students as we're exploring non-traditional students at Mason is that many of us know that Northern Virginia is a big region. It is huge. And if we're thinking about gaps, if we're thinking about current structures that don't really fit the model, what is so core to a Northern Virginia model is that we have people in our community that live 25, 30, 35 minutes away. So the gap is, and the question is like, why would they come back to campus or come onto campus for Friday night for Shabbat dinner, perhaps, if they're living 30 minutes away? That's a question we need to explore. And by understanding the Northern Virginia region and system and context, we can realize that there are other avenues to explore with them. Shabbat dinners around the region for college-age students and individuals, working with our partners, Moishe House, Gather, the Den, what have you, to like really do beautiful work. That is what we need to elevate and do together and expand upon. And the investment of this community, of this organization really gets us to good places. And I'm excited to see what it turns into.
So I'm jumping on something I've now heard, I think all three of you, I don't know who coined it first, but kind of co-creating these Jewish journeys and figuring out how to engage in the dialogue to understand what the right navigation, and I use right very loosely because there's no one size fits all, and entering into this space and the ability to jump into it and dip out, and then to be able to go back in and feel like that's a seamless exercise for somebody or an individual. So it may seem like a pivot, but I want to talk a little bit about what that Jewish journey looks like, that co-creation of that Jewish identity, when the topic, navigates over to Israel. And what does that look like for the conversations that you're having with the communities that you interact with on a regular basis? And so while I plant that question, I want to also note that there are some phenomenal questions coming in to the Q&A. And so after this question, I'm going to kind of divert to some of those and to start introducing those into the conversation. So if you're on the webinar and you are listening, please put in any questions or comments into that QA so that as we transition from this part of the conversation to that one, we can make sure to try to integrate as many questions as possible within the time that we have. And so, as it pertains to Israel, just very, very curious how that shapes the Jewish identities that you all are speaking of, and how do you navigate that? I'll kick it over to whomever wants to unmute the fastest, which there we go, Rabbi Adaret. I'm sure it was a race.
Israel. So I think while it's a sensitive topic, the approach is not so different than other topics that we cover at the Den. So everything we do is very much in a bottom-up approach. We're not sitting around waiting for things to happen. We have our finger on the pulse of the community. But all of our classes, our gatherings, our cohorts, our interfaith couples classes, all the things that we do have manifested because we've been in touch with people on the ground and hearing what they need and then co-creating with them. And the same is true for Israel Dialogue. When something happens in the news, as people are navigating anti-Semitic sentiment, so on social media from friends, and they're surprised, the grateful thing that myself and Rabbi Jenna, who's in Nova, and the rest of our staff team have reflected on recently, they come to us, which feels really great. They'll set up a meeting with the rabbi, they'll reach out to a staff member and say, I want to process this. Is there a space for us to discuss this? And so at this time, we've really been having, especially with the increase of anti-Semitism, you can imagine this is often conflated with Israel. So these topics have been coming up more and more. People are coming to us for dialogue. And so at this time, we're really taking it one conversation at a time, but the more and more conversations that come, we see this critical mass and desire for conversation. So we know that we don't have all the answers. And we also know we want to foster healthy dialogue within our community. That is, we have over 500 people in the community. It's a diverse space. People are all over the place in terms of their views on Israel and also in terms of their education on Israel. And so we want to make sure we're not just putting a program from on high and it's not speaking to the needs. So we've reached out to Resetting the Table to start to explore ways to bring Israel education and dialogue to our community that will both foster support of Israel with also a really important conversation nuance. This community is brilliant. I'm always so in awe of the people who are coming to the Den and their day jobs. And we really want to do a very relevant and honest approach to Israel and all of the pieces. So that is very much something that we are excited to launch into this year.
Is that resonant with you, Rachel, Rabbi Daniel? Anything that you would add?
Yeah, Rabbi Jared is very brave for going first on this. So thank you for being our Honey. So very much this idea of we need to make spaces for people to bring all of their Israel stuff, whether that's nothing, whether that's doubt, whether that's pride. We need to make spaces where they don't feel they need to check any of that at the door. And I think the initiatives that Rabbi Daniel mentioned, Resetting the Table, other dialogue, really those spaces are so rare. If you look at the Israel kind of temperature on campus and again around the country, there are people yelling at each other on both sides. And what we have seen is that young adults are just kind of getting caught in the middle and don't feel like they have a space to explore. And so these spaces that Rabbi Daniel mentioned is happening at the Den. I know they're happening on college campuses. Are very much what Gather's also. We don't create all of those spaces. A lot of what Gather does is we help people find them and connect them to what is already going on. So if we know that there's a dialogue, something happening at another Jewish organization, we will promote that, because the more people find out that those spaces exist, the more young adults are likely to engage on this topic. So yes and yes.
And Rachel, I think that speaks to, well, Rabbi Daniel, I want you to definitely weigh in from a college campus perspective as well. I think that resonates to what I heard earlier too, which is the interconnectedness of our community is really in lockstep. That is something I think is really phenomenal, maybe not unique to our community, but something for our community to be really proud of. I think it stems from even the individuals on this call. We have some tenure together. We have some shared experiences together. And so navigating this within that same lens and with that same commitment and energy and motivation to be a very connected community isn't different, even if the content or the topics become more complex or more nuanced. And I feel like, Rabbi Daniel, that might resonate with how you're working to create similar spaces on campus. And folks are asking in the chat pod just what some of those connections may actually look like and who you might work with in that capacity.
Yeah, I agree with everything that my colleagues just mentioned about creating space, about connecting students and community members and people with opportunities. And to name as Rachel said, it's very overwhelming when people are reading multiple things. Multiple organizations are playing in this field, rightly so, and doing beautiful work. But for a college student who is experiencing this perhaps for the first time on a college campus and seeing organization after organization, person after person, email and reach out and help them figure it out, the work that we try to do is to build off the relationship-based engagement work that we're talking about, and knowing and building relationship with a student, getting to know what their needs are, what they are trying to figure out, and then connecting them with those people in those organizations. That's part of creating space. The other thing about creating space is really elevating and lifting up the stories that we might not hear or read in the headlines. And that's about the spaces where we're allowing our students and our community members to question openly and safely with one another. In beautiful, positive ways. For example, the vice president came to campus a few weeks ago. Many of you might have read on the headlines her response to a specific question about Palestinians. And our students were in our Hillel office, 20, 30 of them, wanting to debrief and figure it out in a safe space with people with whom they're in relationship. So the relationship is the building off point, and then we can connect them to many of the other incredible organizations and people doing work in this area to help them figure out what they need in this time with the Israel-Palestine conversation.
I think that's, a phenomenal way to not tie up this question or conversation, but I think it's resonant and in a way that is the undercurrent of everything that we're talking about today. It's the nature of everybody who's on this webinar, it's on this call, it's about relationships. It's about committing to that relationship for the long term and investing in something bigger that might take time to take shape. And that's what we're doing. All right. That's what I'm hearing you all say you're doing, from the Israel conversation to connecting people regardless of where they are on their journey, to how they enter into our community, whether they go to school here, they live here, they work here, they move here from another place. And so much of this is interconnected. And so I want to tie that to some of the other questions that are coming in through the Q&A, which is basically, how does this work ultimately scale to other populations? And that's a more nuanced question. So I'm going to add some complexity to it. I wouldn't be me if I didn't. So with that in mind, how does this work? How does the work between Gather and the Den differ? How does it scale to other populations? And in part, Rachel, as you mentioned earlier, part of this is that ability to scale from local to national, and the role that funding, whether it's from federation or if we just help build that business case and put it on the map so much that it gains momentum and traction, those are all W's, those are all wins. So I'm curious, how do you, Rachel, if you want to kick us off, how would you articulate that? How does the work differ? How does it relate to other populations? And what is that core attribute that you think is what drives these outcomes?
Yes. So in your question, I'm thinking of a book that helps drive Gather's work that we have read. It's called Lean Impact by Anne May Chang. And what she says is that in innovation work, it's really important to fall in love with the question, not the solution. And I think that this speaks to scale because in our ecosystem, in the Jewish communal world, very oftentimes we are focused on scaling a product, right? On scaling a solution. And the way that we at least see that this relational work is scalable is that it's actually a methodology. It's a methodology that can be applied in multiple contexts with multiple populations, and it's based on a very universal human need, which is to feel seen when you show up and missed when you don't. And so how you do that, right? The solution to that can look very different. It can look different based on what life stage. Again, DC is a very unique, it's almost an embarrassment of riches. There's so much here for young adults to do. And a lot of communities don't have all of that. And so again, it's applying this methodology more broadly and then coming up with different solutions and ways to apply it. And we're very grateful. We just received a grant to help teach people this work. And that doesn't mean that we're going to have a Gather necessarily in different cities. It means that, and actually I saw a question from Rabbi Bill Rudolph in the chat, and I think this connects, which is that we're working with young adults in a very relational way. And what happens is when those young adults move on to other life stages or are looking for their next thing, those other communities are not necessarily set up or equipped to engage them in the way that they've been accustomed to or that they want to be. And so helping other organizations, federations, synagogues understand what relational work can look like in their own contexts, we're creating a healthier ecosystem by understanding that we're centering relationships, really. And that's a paradigm shift, but it is something that we believe can be taught and practiced. And I think we've seen DC over this past decade actually go through a culture change in that respect.
And I think Rabbi Adira, the Den was also really instrumental in facilitating part of that culture change in tandem, right? I think, in different paths and in different ways with the same shared outcome. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Rachel and I talk about this. We happen to be friends and we also go to the same shul, but we talk about this question often because we get it in different spaces. I think first, I remember with one coffee, we both said this, and it was really fun to see both of us like, if we look just at the DMV, at the amount of people in this population who are not yet connected, I don't like to call them unaffiliated. I don't love the title because I think it's too general, but people who have not yet found their Jewish spiritual home, a rabbi, a Jewish community to call their own. We know the study, there's so many of them. We need like 10 Daniel Noviks and George Mason Hillels. We need like 10 Gathers, 10 the Den Collectives to reach everybody. So that's the first thing I like to remind people. It's not like we're trying to create organizations and going after the same people like Pac-Man. It's not like that. The other piece is, what's so beautiful is, while we all have been talking about a relational approach, we're integrating it into our community and our organizations in different ways. So we have we celebrate the gatherings that are really intimate, where people really know each other. While we have hundreds of people, they've never all been in the same space together. So a Torah study of 7 people, a Shabbat dinner of 12 people, a Havdalah service with our band of 30 people, that's how we create intimate gatherings. And so there are people who sometimes will go to gather for something and then come to something else for us. There are people who are feeling what Gather's doing and that's speaking to them, and later come to us, or vice versa, Sixth and I, all the other organizations in the area. And I think ultimately, because we're meeting with the person and finding out who they are, what they need, they're feeling seen, heard, cared for, then making sure, I like to think the Den has like an on-ramp and an off-ramp, that we want to be accessible for the people coming from Hillel or who just landed here because they got a job on the Hill and they've never lived here before. We want to make sure they feel access to some community. And then when they're ready, we have 24 new and expectant parents that have joined us this year. They are now starting to ask us, where do we go to synagogue? I'm not building a preschool, right? I'm going to connect them with all the beautiful JCCs and synagogues in the area. And we do that with a really intentional handoff. And this model that I just described can work anywhere. We have people around the country asking us, can you bring this? And so it really can work because it's about people and their needs and then pivoting to fit what the community needs.
And we see a lot of those parents at the preschool fairs. So it really does go from end to end, which is phenomenal. I'm curious, Rabbi Daniel, if you wanted to weigh in from the perspective of just how you may work together with, you mentioned it briefly earlier, but it's probably worth an exclamation point, just the intersection between your work and Rachel and Rabbi Aderet's work. And I'll overemphasize this because I think it's phenomenal, and it is something that does feel honestly a little bit unique to me. Robin mentioned that this is a new role for Federation, and it wasn't something I expected coming in. It's been something that's been amazing about this community, is that you all do work together. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we talk about measurement. But just curious, Rabbi Daniel, how what the other two have just said, how that resonates.
Yeah, totally. Rabbi Aderet mentioned the work with parents and preschools and connecting them. Certainly that sort of connection and model is the type of work we're trying to establish in this DMV Hillel pipeline project. And one way we're doing that and exploring that is through the lens of mentorship. Because honestly, I would be very concerned if the work that we put on campus with our students does not have direct payoff for the work that Rabbi Aderet and Rachel are doing, and then other organizations and communities are doing as well. I want to be preparing my students and college-aged individuals in Northern Virginia to be contributors in the Jewish landscape in this area. And so one way we're trying to explore that is through this mentorship program. If we're connecting a college student with a next-gen young adult, whatever we want to call the demographic person, for professional development and growth, but also personal development and growth. And if these students are staying in this area, they are directly connected to an individual who's already connected and integrated into these communities. And so when students, let's call her Rebecca, reaches out to mentor, let's call him David, Rebecca will ask David, oh, it's Passover's coming up. What are we doing what do you do for Passover? Or Shabbat, I'm looking for Shabbat dinner. What do you know about? That is a streamlined system that is more than just names on a paper that I give to Rabbi Aderet or Rachel. It is a direct connection with people in those communities that are being mentors and role models in more ways than one. And so that is one of the many examples of the kind of how we work together with these different communities across age demographics.
That's phenomenal. And it's an interesting and good segue to a question that I'm so excited. I promise I didn't plant this in the QA or in the chat pod. Although for folks who know me, you know that I would totally ask it. So I'm glad it showed up. I want to talk a little bit about measurement. And so when I entered into this role, I think one of the very first meetings I convened, Rabbi Daniel, you were not in your role yet, but Rachel, you may remember it. Darrett, you may remember it. We sat in the townhouse. We sat in the Gather DC townhouse, and we took advantage of all the whiteboards, and we said, how do we measure this? We talked about the difference between outputs, how many people versus outcomes. What does it mean? What does it result in? And how do they continue their engagement? How does it resonate? I saw some questions in there around interfaith and intrafaith. And how do we really quantify some of this work? And so I love this question. I throw it out to all of you. And I'm just curious that I'm not going to kick it over to any one individual, but I know it's top of mind for all of you because it's been an evolution. We've all worked together to think holistically around, do we all measure the same thing? How do we connect our community to each other, and what does good look like? So I'm curious if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I do remember that meeting so well. It was very, very early on. And I guess there's just kind of one point that I would put into this, which is we know that the metrics we currently do have are insufficient, right? So I kind of want to name that there's a bridge to be burnt, which is that if we keep falling back on program participation as the success goal, because that's what we know, then we're never really going to be able to change culture and measure different things. And so, and again, I've spoken with both of my colleagues on this call about this, which is what are the other things that we measure and what is the investment in that technology or systems that we need to invest to do it. And so we, and I know that Dan as well, has designed a constituent relationship management tool that measures different things. So some of ours are the number of people who we've met during certain times of year, when young adults have moved here. We collect their birthdays, not to send them like a template, but to actually like notice them and see them and tell them happy birthday on their birthday. We often do that with gifts. Part of our mission is to connect people to each other. And so how do you measure that? So we actually have a button in our system now where when we introduce two people to each other or a group of people to each other, we mark that. And then we have metrics that are showing these 5 people have been connected through Gather. And when we follow up, we can see, are they all still friends? Are they all still in a relationship? So again, it's forcing ourselves to think differently about what we're measuring because we know it has to be different, and experimenting with that and being open to new metrics, I think, is a really important part of relational work.
I'm going to go a little bit Jeopardy style, and Rabbi Darrett and Rabbi Daniel, I know you both want to unmute. I've seen you leaning in. So if we can just do maybe 30 to 45 seconds so we leave time for one last quick question before we hand it back to Robin.
So I think we're actually in the middle of building our own Salesforce instance. We were using one from another organization, and it's been a dream because we are building it exactly from our needs. We've been tracking people's qualitative and quantitative data. So while we can say 30 people came to this event, because of we're following people's learning journeys, people who've learned with us for several years are now in a leadership training to lead peer-led classes or to co-create classes with us. We have a new button called Den Friend that we created a while back where we're tracking relationships. And one example that I just want to highlight real quick, which I think is a beautiful way to show it's one thing to have data, but how you utilize the reports is beautiful. Family in the community has a new baby. They email us. They're not yet connected to a synagogue. We can pull a report of all the people they've ever interacted with, Shabbat meals, classes, what have you. We then email them this really beautiful announcement. So-and-so, you've been with this person before and they just had a new baby. It's Jewish tradition to do this when a family welcomes a new child. Here's the meal train, wish them a mazel tov. And people not only feel connected, but we're like also teaching them the value of these community building tools that we want them to take with them elsewhere.
Ditto.
Go for it.
I'm good. Ditto.
You're good. Pass.
Very briefly, data is also a long-term game here, right? Like, and I think Jewishly, we have to accept that and love that. Like, the Israelites traveled for so long in the Torah. They had no idea what that end goal was. I think we need to dig deep in that, trust the data we have, trust the innovation we're doing with that data, and have a faith and belief that something will come from it and of it.
Data for the sake of data is not insight. And so that to me, that's what resonates with what all of you are saying. And I love your exclamation point, Rabbi Daniel, because the value of data, the importance of data is that every time you learn something, it should immediately lead you to say, so what, or what else, or what next? And it doesn't mean that we aren't measuring or that what we did wasn't successful. It's just that challenge to ourselves to keep innovating and learning and growing and evolving what we do. So we have 2 minutes left because I just stole some of your time, but I would love to give you each, we need to hand this back to Robin in 2 minutes. And so just really curious, 20 seconds, final thoughts, what are some of the biggest successes that you've been, most proud of for our community, or what do you think about the future of Jewish community in the DMV? Jump right in, unmute. This is a lightning round before we hand it back.
I think the future is very hopeful. Young adults are seeking and they will find, and Jewish life is going to look very different in the future than it did in the past. And I think that's a really good thing. And I'm very grateful that Federation is investing in these experiments.
I'll say the strong belief in an interconnected Jewish ecosystem, which the Federation clearly fosters for all of us and other organizations and is showcased here today. The idea, right, Rachel said it before, it is intimidating for some to navigate the Jewish world, especially in this age group, and for them to know that there are clear on and off ramps where people are going to make personal connections, take the time to get to know you, connect you to what you need next. That's key. And so at the core of our human need, right, if we're going to really have people feel seen and heard and cared for, we need to create this like very soft landing place for them to navigate and feel taken care of.
Thank you. Rabbi Daniel, bring us home.
If you ask the question, what's your story or what keeps you up at night, that can lead to so much growth and opportunity. And so the future of this Jewish community and the work that we're all trying to do is asking that question. And I think if we build upon that question and build upon that work, I agree with my colleagues, like there's a lot of opportunity and growth to come.
Well, thank you all for embracing this conversation, talking about what motivates you, and the fact that what you're doing today didn't exist 10 years ago, 15 years ago, shows that the investment long-term in the future, creating the space and the opportunity for this environment, so critical to evolving and sustaining our community. So thank you very much. And with that, I will hand it back to Robin.
Thank you all so much. I can say this discussion so aligns with what Gil Preuss, our Federation CEO, has envisioned. To build the future we all imagine, we must think differently and evolve and reinvent Jewish life. Listening to the panelists, that is definitely happening. Just the word co-create speaks volumes. These three amazing leaders are thinking holistically, creating a healthy ecosystem. So I thank you all. And I thank everyone on the call today. I hope you all have experienced tremendous satisfaction these last 20 years. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs noted that Jews are not so much what we are, but what we are called on to be. You have used your tzedakah and leadership to create a more just world. On behalf of Federation, thank you for answering that call. You inspire us with the legacy you created. I look forward to seeing you again, and have a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone.